Okay, we're ready to go. Talofa lava, everyone, and warmest Pacific greetings. My name is Brianna Fruin, and it is my absolute pleasure to be the facilitator slash MC for today. We have here the Voices of Resilience, a event or a talanoa storytelling session on how our young people have shown up and shown resilience in the face of the climate crisis. In particular, young people from the Pacific Climate Warriors, which is a group I'm a part of and a group that my friends are a part of that will be joining us today. I thought I would start off today's event with mentioning the giants who we get to stand on shoulders, whose shoulders we get to stand on, because they are really the reasons why we get to be here today. It is not lost on us that it is Pacific leadership that has always led the way in the climate space. We get to be here and be proud of our elders, be proud of our negotiators, be proud of our ministers who are constantly holding the line in these negotiations. And so we wanted to honor that. As young Pacific people, we honor the elders who have put energy and who have watered us as the seedlings who are growing up in our villages. We honor the fact that the knowledge that our elders have are gifted to us, and those are gifts that we hold forever. A beautiful example of this intergenerational knowledge sharing is our warrior here, Moana. Moana is a climate activist, and she's also a Pacific dancer. And she carries with her the lessons from her mom, from her lineage of dancers, from her dad and her family who have passed on this indigenous knowledge of dance and of art. Moana comes here with a very special story that her uncle gifted her before she embarked on her journey to COP. And we just think that this is a beautiful example of how our young people here in the COP space, in the climate space, carry with them the stories of their ancestors that enrich their work here in the climate space. And so I would love to introduce Moana, and she would be sharing with you all a little bit of herself today.
O lea ta oto ia sa o le vau filifili. Ina ne'i o upa o tia o na to ia leo au I mala o le vau sa. Pe musu vau sa, pe musu vau fo'i le asa. O na fele lei lea o le fui fui o le seunga. E whai ngata le mamalu lele, e wha olo olo ngata. Au asa fo'i le sami, sa le lau ele, sa le vau. Au o lea, e mamalu lea itu o lea oa. I le mata I sau o le fofoanga. Tu launa la ia o le whaafofonga tai o le lalangi. Ai sei o tātou a le anga I le sosia o le fofoanga a le atua sili ese. E ua whai mo tātou a inga, mamalusanga o tangata soifua uma o le lalulangi. Talofa lava, everyone. My name is Moana Shwenki. Moana in Samoan means sleeping ocean. So I ask that you picture what that looks like in your mind, a sleeping ocean. I am here with the Pacific Climate Warriors for the Pacific Islands and for especially my home Samoa. I come from the villages of Awala and Matawai in Savaii and Vauala, and I'm a very proud Pacific Islander. As we know, the Pacific Islands, the 20,000 plus islands in the largest body of ocean in the world, is at threat because of the climate crisis, and the ocean, exacerbated by climate change, continues to creep closer on our lands every single day. Now, the Samoan passage that I began with was a special message from my uncle, who was a very high chief in Samoa, and he wrote that message for me to share as if he was speaking to the world leaders here at COP. And translated in English, this is what it means. Leave the sacredness of the environment alone. If you touch, disturb, interfere, then you are going to have to face the consequences. I cannot afford to explain what the consequences are, like reading the palm of my hand. If the environment is destroyed, I cannot imagine all the problems that we will face. The ocean is sacred, it is out of bounds. The land is sacred, it is out of bounds. The forest is sacred, it is out of bounds. You don't want to make noise in the out-of-bound areas of the earth because you don't want to wake the giant up. Because when the giant wakes up, he will do something that we cannot fathom. World leaders understand that there are grave consequences for touching, disturbing, and interfering with the sacredness of the environment. And I thought that would be a perfect way to begin, sharing a story from someone who is living on the front lines in Samoa. To continue, I'm a fire dancer, and fire dancing in Samoa is called sivafi. It is performed with a weapon that is called a nifo'oti, a single hook-shaped weapon. I wasn't able to bring it in today because of the restrictions. But in Samoa, we literally dance with natural elements like fire, and we perform movements that mimic the warriors, the great warriors of our past. We do it for entertainment, for cultural fulfillment, for fun, but for me, it's a portal into my past to connect with my ancestors, to connect with my cultures, to learn more about the lands that I carry with me every day, no matter if I'm in the Pacific or if I'm abroad. Without my land base, I know that my dances would have no meaning. So to continue, there's a special legend from the district that I'm from about a woman, a goddess of war, and her name was Nafanua. She disguised herself as a man and fought for the protection of her village with a weapon that looked very similar to that of a nifo'oti. In one of the most trying times in my life, my family thankfully made a trip back home to Savaii in this particular village, and we walked through the forest that she would have walked in, walked and saw the caves that she would have taken refuge in during her battles. And I can honestly say that returning back to my land, and we call land whanua in Samoa, and rekindling that spiritual connection with the land that carries so many legends, myths, stories, was a revelation for me. The land that has a heartbeat breathes strength back into me, because land for us is our life source, and losing it is not an option. Every year, millions of tourists around the world visit the Pacific in search of something that I think only Pacific people can give. We're joyful people, we put on a good show, and we live by the most sacred cultural values. And it's evident that all throughout history, no matter what we went through, whether it be colonialism or even now during the climate crisis, when the world is savage to us, we show our sacred values back to those people. Today, outside people, neighboring countries, they come, buy, build, bring tourists onto our islands, but right now, when there is drought or too many cyclones, when the sea levels are rising, when the fish start dying, when the pollution is overwhelming, we cannot evacuate. We must see those people that are at the front lines and act. There was a time over 100 years ago, during European colonial conquest into the Pacific, when it seemed that traditional Pacific Island way of life, and my people for that matter, would be lost. Imagine at that time, for our Pacific ancestors, everything they loved and valued suddenly stolen and stripped off of them for someone else to reap the resources, make money from, and flaunt their power over. And although colonial projects continue to happen to this day, we are here, our islands still stand, and I will always have a home to, if our world leaders act, to halt this climate emergency. And if they fully understand that the solutions to this climate crisis lie in the indigenous knowledges of the world, who have protected their lands for centuries. So if you pictured a calm ocean, a sleeping ocean in the beginning, now picture a violent one, crashing over our lands that carry our culture, washing over my ancestors' burial grounds, and my people having to migrate because of this. Like my uncle who lives at the front lines, let's continue to fight the hands that feed climate change for our homes that we love so much. Fight the hands that feed climate change so that the giant doesn't wake up and do something that we cannot fathom. Fight the hands that feed climate change so that the oceans continue to sleep and do not rise. The longer emissions reductions are postponed, the higher the costs will be for our people and for the entire world. We need not look far before we see that the Earth is sending us important messages every day through accelerated sea level rise, exacerbated natural disasters, and extreme weather patterns. So with that, I might ask if we could flick it over to the next. So with that, I thought to commemorate that story, I would perform a dance that was actually choreographed and performed by my mum a very long time ago. She performed it in 1998 for the Miss South Pacific and for the Miss Samoa. And this dance is about the manume bird, a red tooth-billed pigeon, which is our national bird. And at the moment, it's nearing extinction, it's nearing being endangered. We only have very few birds left, and this is very much due to human impacts. Although the dance that I will perform mimics the movements of the manume bird, it is also about preserving our cultures, preserving our lands, preserving our wildlife, and everything that makes us who we are. So I thought that this would be a fitting siva to do. And I'll also flick it to the next slide if possible. If you do want to, If you do want to participate while I am dancing, there's three, just then it will come up on the screen, 3 words that you can say. So the first one was atamai, I believe. Yes, atamai means you're encouraging the dancer to smile. So if everyone wants to repeat after me, I'll say atamai, and you guys repeat. Atamai. Okay, one more time. Atamai. Atamai. Good. Okay, the second one is siva mai. That's you're encouraging the dancer to keep going, to keep dancing. So I'll say siva mai, and you guys repeat. Good. And then the last one is malie. Beautiful. You're telling the dancer she's doing beautiful. So everyone say malie. Okay, and those 3 words will be on while I'm dancing, so feel free to say it as I'm dancing. Hope you enjoy. Sauia. Yeah.
so much, Moe. And that's another beautiful example of how our young people use their passions to show up in the climate space. Moe is a beautiful dancer, and that has guided her here to COP today, and we are very lucky to have her here. Young Pacific people are not just victims to the climate crisis, and we see that time and time again as our young people continuously show up to fight the climate crisis. A lot of the young people that wanted to be here today and wanted to be represented couldn't access this space, and we are here and we're honored to be here to represent them. Two of our young people who were able to make this trip over was Bakiruso and Salome. And I am very honored to invite them to the stage today to have a talanoa, to have an informal discussion on why it's so important that our young people feel included in the climate space and also feel like they are welcomed here. So can I get a hand of applause for Salome and Makiruso? Okay. I may ask you first, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Tala whakoutou, toku inoa, ko Salome Matangi, ko au se tino tūwalu, o au whoi o se Tamaitai Samoa. I'm here with the Pacific Climate Warriors, and I am based in New South Wales.
Talo Falava, my name is Make Rusa Porotasano. I'm from American Samoa, and I am a member of the Council of Elders for the Pacific Climate Warriors, and I'm based in Portland, Oregon.
Okay. My first question will be for you, Salome. Can you explain who are the Pacific Climate Warriors?
Okay, so the Pacific Climate Warriors are the absolute best people in the whole world. On a more serious note, we are a youth-led organization. We have 15 teams. We have teams across 15 of our island nations as well as our diaspora. So we basically do the work for climate justice and climate action for our Pacific people.
And Matt, do you mind answering why did you become a warrior? Why did you get into this work?
That's a great question. I almost feel peer pressured to be in the group. In 2014, a co-parent that I'm with gave a poem to the General Assembly about our daughter Matufele Beno. And there was a promise in that poem that her mommy and daddy, or Jima and Boo Boo, were going to fight for her. And from that day on, I decided I'm going to answer the call of that poem and be a climate dad. And so here I am, honoring her name and her mom's work, and joining this fight for my life and our lives.
Yeah. I think that's so important that we acknowledge that all of us got into the climate work through different pathways, but I'm sure that the space is very happy to have us all because it needs us all. Salome, it hasn't been the easiest journey to be here, and I think it's evident in how strong but small a lot of our youth delegations are here at COP. Mm-hmm. Do you mind explaining some of the work of those you are bringing into the space? What do your community do back home to show up in this climate crisis?
Okay. So like I said, I'm based in New South Wales. We have many strong warriors within our team, but one of the warriors that I would love to speak about, her name is Bine. Bine Esera Peleti. She is a daughter of Tokelau, very, very proud daughter of Tokelau, and she basically shows up in our spaces, and she always brings her Tokelau youth with her. So she is a whaletua right now. So she went from a Pacific Climate Warrior to Tokelau royalty very quickly. But if you have a look at this picture right behind us, this is actually one of our workshops that we held in Sydney. So what we did was we had a talanoa. Usually we do this around kava, but you cannot see the kava in there because we didn't have any. We decided to have it after, also because we had younger children with us. But basically we have a talanoa, We give space to everybody in the circle to share their own story and find their connection, because I feel like our Pacific climate work is based on storytelling. As it's been mentioned before, our stories are told by our elders and they are given to us, and then we then tell them and share them with our future generations to come. So although we may not be here one day, our stories will still be here. So in that picture you do see us sharing story. Another thing that we do is we followed the trend. The reason why I say that is because there was once a time where frames were a very popular thing on social media. So what we did was we had one of our creative warriors create a frame which literally had the words "Have Your Say," hashtag "Have Your Say" on the frame. What we did was we took this to Fiji Day, Tonga Day, and Samoa Independence, and we used it to break the ice or bait people into conversation. And we would just ask them a simple question like, would you like to take a photo with our frame? And usually it would lead to, yeah, sure, what does that mean? Like, what are you guys doing here? And then we would use that to start talking about our work as Pacific climate warriors, and also tell them about how they could have their say. Another thing is we work with our Indigenous groups that are Indigenous to the land that we are on. And we show up to strikes, we speak, we run workshops within the youth, not just across the community, but we also reach out to the Samoan community, Tuvaluan community. We work with high schools and universities, and we try and bridge that gap. Because growing up, I feel like I didn't really learn about the effects that climate change had on the islands. So that's the thing that we're trying to bring into this space to ensure that our youngins that are coming up don't feel the same way.
Yeah, no, that's so important. And I think I really appreciate seeing a lot of our diaspora Pacific people really show up and fight for their islands, even though a lot of them haven't even been home yet. But that's how pressing it is that you can get on a phone call with your aunties and uncles back home, and they will tell you the stories of how their land is changing. Mac, have you ever experienced that phone call, or have you ever seen that yourself? The way that things have changed back home.
Yeah, and then they're generational stories, right? So for me, in my short time living in American Samoa, I lived through 2 hurricanes, 2 tropical storms. And I remember calling my parents who weren't living in Samoa at the time, hey, like, what did y'all do when you had tropical storms? And they were like, my whole life living in Samoa, we only had one. And that hit me right away. It was like, and this is like earlier 2000s, right? And we know like the impact of tropical storms and how frequent they are now, and that's has a direct correlation to our changing environment. And I heard you say something earlier, and I wanted to mention this too. Like, the amazing thing about this climate work and finding our young people in this work, especially in the U.S. diaspora, we don't have the same kind of population mass, right? That maybe Australia or New Zealand has. And sometimes there's a disconnect from home. And being able to join something like our climate fight out of the Pacific, to join the Pacific Climate Warriors, builds that identity development. And I think that's so crucial for a lot of our young people in the US diaspora, because their history, their language, their stories, those things are all dismantled in our education system. I'm an educator by trade. That's what I do. I teach at a community college and I run a multicultural center. And for me, it's like a lot of this work is around dismantling those practices and allowing our story to take place so our students can see themselves not just in the education realm, but they can see themselves at home. And so while they might not have had the opportunity to go home, they can be like, I contributed to the revitalization and the preservation of culture. And so the work we're doing is really crucial. It's not just like what we see here. We're deeply impacting the Pacific as a whole.
One of your students, one of your Pacific Climate Warriors, spoke at the climate strikes and gave a very moving speech that was shared and practically went viral online about being matangi ma'alohi, being strong winds. How do you see this Pacific resilience really show up in the young people that you get to work with? And do you feel like that's their way of reclaiming their narrative as Pacific people?
Absolutely. I mean, the same way the Pacific has had to deal with 3 waves of colonialism, right, in multiple instances, our students and our young people in the U.S. have to deal with, multiple systems or their own pending waves. So the analogy I always use is living in the Marshall Islands for the time that I did. We all knew what the pending wave was, right? So when we organize in the Marshall Islands, it's like we need to stop this incoming wave. King tides come, everybody sees it. We know climate change is real. When we started working with the youth in the U.S. and we kicked right into climate action, it was like blank stares, right? And we had an aha moment. Me and Kathy and one of our warriors, Simeon, were running that training, and it just dawned on me, this isn't the impending wave for a lot of our young people, right? It's like food sovereignty, it's like paying rent, it's like dealing with police brutality, it's dealing, and like a lot of our women lead our movements in the Pacific, so they're dealing with sexism, right? It's all these systems of oppression that affect our young people that we have to unpack before we can join the climate movement. So Kevin Aipopo was the person who spoke that day. He went literally through 2 years of training before he got to a place where he was able to, step up and be in a place to participate, right? And that's the resilience that, like, no matter what these waves that are hitting them, that they're always pushing forward, they're navigating through that. And I think that's very rooted in our Pacific ways. If anyone's ever got to go on, our traditional canoes and boats, the bigger the wave, the faster you're going. And so whatever that challenge is that hits us, it's just another opportunity for us to get over that. And shout out to Kevin.
Yeah, look at that. No matter how much our young people have going on in their lives, they know the importance of showing up into this fight, and they do so anyways. Lome, earlier you mentioned Have Your Say. And I think that was from a different time when the Have Your Say campaign first started. So the Have Your Say Pacific Climate Warriors campaign started around COP23, going into Bonn, going into the Fiji presidency, and that's where a lot of that work started and where you came into the picture as well. And now you're here at COP26. And again, we had Have Your Say to build this foundation for us to be here at COP. Do you mind explaining a little bit what Have Your Say is and some of that campaigning that's going on currently at home?
So Have Your Say, for those of you who may not know, this right here and this is a say. So we thought that we would use the word because in English we say, have your say, say something, like you would say something to say your piece, right? So we thought that we would connect it to the Pacific and let everybody have their say. S-E-I instead of S-A-Y or Sa-E-E. So yeah, it was basically just bringing people's voices, bringing people's stories, and making sure that they were being heard. So around the globe, we had people mobilizing, we had teams having their say during like a sip and paint sort of thing. So people came together, they painted banners. We had people coming together through song, where they had some sort of concert, I think it was in Fiji, where we brought people together through music and dance. We had people in New South Wales come together at the strike. Moana's mum actually spoke at our strike in Sydney. What else did we do? We also had a filter, as I mentioned before, about following the trend. It's not really following the trend, it's finding out what's hot at the moment and making sure that we can utilize that to bring our youth in. So we had a filter with this say right here, which was made by Jay. To make sure that everybody was coming on board as well to say their piece. So it was basically your chance or your moment, your opportunity to bring your story into this space. Because at the end of the day, we are in this fight together, and everybody's story plays a big role in what we do.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Us four with Moe, we get to be here, but a lot of the work that is being done is back home in the islands. It's campaigning through things like Have Your Say. Our warriors in Samoa, which is where I come from, I saw them doing an event back home, and they're constantly showing up, and they're really the ones that carry a lot of the weight, because back home, they're the ones that do the fe'aus, the chores. So when there's a project happening back home in the islands, it's always the young people that come and carry the sandbags, that cut down the trees, that dig the holes for the planting. And so a lot of our warriors, that's their everyday lives back home in the islands. They're constantly in this state of adapting to the environment, constantly in this state of having to show resilience. And that's really the work that we hope to highlight, that we're not just here at COP, campaigning for something that is just personal to us. We're campaigning for a collective vision that all of our warriors back home that we serve hold in their hearts. And I guess my last question for both of you is, what do you feel the world or systems like COP can learn from Pacific resilience, from young Pacific resilience?
Everything. I feel like our Pacific youth are amazing. We're not just climate victims, we're climate leaders, and we are fortunate enough to learn that from our elders. We have amazing elders that make space for us, that pave the way, and that share whatever they've learned with us. Our Pacific elders' leadership, they haven't failed us. They've made sure to be in this work, in this hard work, and they've showed us how to do that. So I feel like the world can look to Pacific leadership, look to Indigenous knowledge. We have the answers. We're living with climate change right now. It's our reality now, not in the next 20 years, 10 years. This is what we're living with, especially our Pacific family and voices that are on the front lines. I would say we don't just need another COP. We need another COP of action, and we need your talk to start matching your walk. So that's what I would say.
How am I supposed to top that, right? I think about my home right now, and it's, the interesting thing where I live is my mom and her sisters invite themselves to my house. I never gave them a key. They got one. They just show up. And when they all show up, my mom's like, hey, you need to pull stuff out the fridge and stuff and start cooking for people. And I remember just telling my mom, like, well, what am I supposed to eat later? And she kind of scolded me. She's like, if we don't take stuff out of here now, for people, then we don't have room to bring them into our lives, right? Mm-hmm. And that was my mom's, definition of hospitality. The Pacific people here at COP have been bringing this idea of hospitality, not only just us out in the streets, but I think leadership around, we're going to give up something for the greater good. Mm-hmm. And I think the rest of the world can see that's a practice they're all going to have to embrace in order for this thing to work. In order to maintain 1.5, everybody has to give up something. And even though we contribute the least, we keep showing up at COP willing to give up something in order to save this world. And I hope the rest of the world leaders see that.
Yeah, that's the good one. I think that ties in everything so perfectly, because when we were given the space to do this here today, and we had a little team meeting between us, and we thought, what do we want to give? We didn't ask ourselves, what do we want to get? And we thought, we want to give dance, we want to give talanoa, give story, and lastly, we thought we want to give song. And I think those are the things that if you go to an island home, you'll find. You'll find talanoas, which is what we just had. You'll find the dancing, which is what Moya gifted us with. And I think finally, if I could ask Mac, if he would like to give us the third thing you'll always find in an island home, a guitar and a song. So yes, Mac, please. While Mac shares, we actually have messages for you all. Last week, there was a lot of messaging around COP failing and nothing happening within this venue, and that the real leadership was happening outside. A lot of us didn't feel that this was true, because we knew that there were Pacific, small island, vulnerable community negotiators who were inside COP holding the line. And because we knew this, we actually asked through our colleagues here, through 350, if we could get messages of support for people inside COP. So as Mac gifts you a song, I will also flick through messages of support and gifts to you all inside COP for the people who are outside, who see what you're doing, and who support and love you all. Thank you.
If you want to throw money at me, feel free to do that. Ia tasi, I tato uma, le tama, olo na lofa, ua tato maua, ai e lalo langi, le tato ua tasi, to atuli, matatalo, ile anganga, feso soani, na te whaia, I tato uma, ina ia tasi. Tasi le loto, tasi le fatu, tasi le aina, ile langi waia au maia, woho, se to atuli, matatalo, ile anganga, feso soani, na te whaia, I tato uma, ina ia tasi, na te whaia, I tato uma, ina ia tasi.
So we actually got so many of these messages. How many? We got over 1,000 messages of support for people within COP, for those who are holding down the front line and making sure that what's happening in negotiations reflect the most vulnerable. And we really thought we could get through a handful of them during Mac's song, but there's so many. So over 1,000 and counting other messages of hope and love from all corners of the world are coming in for the Pacific Climate Warriors, for the Pacific negotiators, for the Pacific youth, for those leading the way of vulnerable communities, for those who are fighting for climate justice. There's so much love for you, and we wanted to remind you all that, even though sometimes it can be a little bit disheartening, especially in the second week of COP when everyone's energy is coming down. But we appreciate everyone who's holding the line. And to end us off today, I will invite up the 350 Pacific director, the very amazing Joseph Sikulu, who will be tying us up.
Can you make it? I'm like the old uncle that comes up in the end and then just pretends like I did all the work when I didn't. But I just want to start by saying thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for choosing to be with us in this moment. When this came up, we knew we had to do something in order to ensure that we can tell the story of the people within these negotiations who are holding the line and who are bringing so much resilience to this. Over these last weeks, we have been through a roller coaster of emotions as we have given our heart and soul to the world, telling our stories. And it's been 3 long weeks. And the reality is that there have been so many stories being told outside of how COP is a failure or how the real action is happening on the outside when we all know differently because we've been showing up every day. We've been showing up and giving everything. And I think I'm like this because in the Pacific, our relationship to leadership is different from how it is all over the world. Our leadership isn't far from us, it's within arm's reach. We see our leaders every day, we eat with them, we talk with them, we hear of the frustrations they're carrying, and we see the burdens that are on their shoulders. And as young people, we know it's our job to try and carry some of that, to try and shift the burden off theirs and to push that forward. And so we knew at this point we had to do something, and I know Brianna said that we didn't come here to ask for anything but just to give, but I'm going to make an ask. I'm going to make, because after this, the one thing we wanted to do the most is to show the world that what we are doing is holding the line, to show our negotiators who are still within these negotiations that we are holding the line. For every Pacific negotiator, there are 12 fossil fuel lobbyists working against us. And so over these today and tomorrow and this weekend, all of the people who are still within these negotiations need to know that we are here and that we are holding the line. And so we are going to do something that we're going to ask your participation with, because it's about participation. What we have with us is all of the flags of the Pacific. We are going to unfurl them out. We are going to walk outside, turn right, and walk towards negotiations. For the first time in UNFCCC history, they have allowed an action including flags, and it's because it's an important message that we have to send. And the message that we are telling the world is that we are still here, we are still holding the line, we're here for our people who cannot be here, we're here for our families on the islands who need us to be here, we are here because the negotiations haven't finished, and we are here because we demand real action. And so our ask is that you just join us. We are going to be walking out of here carrying all of our flags. Whether you're from the Pacific or not, you can march with us as an ally. This isn't just for the Pacific, it's for all of our negotiators who are still in those rooms, who are still working away. We knew in Paris, they were out there for 3 days straight negotiating for the Paris Agreement, and we know they're going to be in here too. And so the least we can do is just show up in a way that shows solidarity. And so we're going to march out here, and then what we'll do is walk towards there. We're going to follow Nico. When we get to the end, what we will do is gift our negotiators with another dance, because our girls love to dance. But it'll just be a march of solidarity. And so we ask that if you can please just march with us. We would love that more than anything.